Hi. Have you ever been in a family gathering for festive events? I'm sure you have. You know what I'm talking about. It's the holiday season, you're sitting around with your beloved family members, adults, teenagers, children, elderly, sitting together in the living room, spending some quality time together. Well, if you have, there's a chance you come across this exact situation. You've not seen your grandfather in a while. You call out to your grandfather. You try to make a good conversation with him. You ask him, "Hey grandpa, how have you been?" He smiles and nods. You follow up with a question. "Have you been exercising?" He smiles and nods. And then you ask again, "Hey, what exercise did you do?" He smiles and nods. You ask again, "What exercise did you do?" He smiles and nods. You might be wondering, what does this have to do with anything? Well, in case you have not noticed, your grandfather has a hearing loss. Do you know that people with hearing loss, they tend to shy away from social events, from interactions with family members? Why? Because they're afraid to be judged for their hearing loss. They are afraid to have to keep asking you to repeat yourselves again and again and again. Do you know there's a research that shows that people with hearing loss wait an average of 10 whole years, 10 years, before even considering seeking professional help. And during these 10 years, what happens? Relationships fall apart. Risk of cognitive decline, dementia, loneliness and isolation, and even depression increases tenfold. I think we can all do better than that. Hi, my name is Ethan. I'm an audiologist and a regional product trainer for Southeast Asia region with WSA. And welcome to the WSA Hearing Academy. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, an ENT care specialist, Dr. Ho, and he will walk us through why untreated hearing loss can lead to an unsatisfactory life for hearing impaired individuals and their loved ones. Dr. Ho breaks down for us where the biggest challenges lie in treating hearing loss. ENT Senior Consultant at Gleneagles Hospital, author of over 40 peer-reviewed papers in international journals, as well as the principal investigator and co-investigator for over 16 grants from the UK and the Singapore government. Dr. Ho emphasizes that seeking hearing treatment early is the key to avoid auditory deprivation and cognitive decline. We also have April joining us with the discussion to talk about how we can approach this topic as a hearing care professional. April has spent over 15 years in the hearing industry as a senior principal audiologist with clinical, training, sales, and management experience in the APAC region. April is currently the head of sales for the Southeast Asia core markets and the head of the WSA Southeast Asia Clinical Excellence team. One of the most well-known audiologists in our region, with a burning passion for making an impact and creating a positive difference. April reveals how we can improve our counseling skills to better the lives of those with hearing loss. So tune in now, and you can witness for yourself how we can help our loved ones survive and thrive with hearing loss today.
Welcome everyone. Today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Ho join us at our Hearing Academy webinar. Good morning, Dr. Ho. Thanks for joining us today at our WSA Hearing Academy webinar. And I know that one of the greatest passion you have in this field, and based on your experience, is to research on the findings between hearing loss and cognitive decline. So I would like to hear from you, based on your personal findings and your research findings, what are some of the greatest takeaways that you have for this?
Okay. Good morning, April. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share on this topic. I think on the research side, to summarize, within Singapore, if you look at the population of patients that we see in the hospital, right? For those patients with hearing loss who accept hearing aids, the profile of the patients is quite interesting. we have found that they have quite advanced hearing loss.
Advanced.
Yeah, almost severe. And what do I mean by that is that if you look at their audiogram, the average thresholds would be 67 decibel.
67.
Yeah, and that's in the better hearing ear. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And the average age for them, for those who accept hearing aid, is about 70.
Okay, so 67 decibels hearing loss, and at the age of them acting on it, it's at age of 70.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's something easy to remember. 67, 70. So, Dr. Ho, what about based on your personal experience as a clinician, right? What are some of the common findings that you have about hearing loss, and that how does that link to the impact of their lives?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that, because this is probably the more important and more interesting part of my job, the human interaction. Right, so I must have seen hundreds of patients over the years, and there are certain common trends, certain traits with these patients, and usually they will come with their caregivers. It could be their children or grandchildren. Yeah, because the patients, some of them are quite elderly by the time they present. And it's interesting that even when you have the audiogram in front of you showing, pretty advanced hearing loss, when you ask the patient about the hearing loss, they will say, I'm okay. I don't think my hearing is that bad. And they will often say,
I can hear you, doctor, no worry.
Yeah,
right?
We're having this conversation, but of course, this would be the ideal environment, right? One-to-one, quiet, face-to-face, which you don't often get in the real world.
For sure.
Yeah. And of course, at this point, I would need to ask them the right sort of questions and to get them to understand the impact the hearing has on their lives, right? And their lifestyle. And what is very common, right? You soon help them realize that even though they are having conversations with their families, maybe friends, a lot of times these conversations have been reduced to transactional conversations.
Interesting, transactional conversations.
Yeah. So what do I mean by that? Is having those sort of simple conversation, right? Where you have simple answer, yes,
so
no.
Close-ended.
Yes, correct.
Yes, no, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like, Mom, have you had your breakfast?
And sometimes you find that they're actually guessing.
Yeah, because even then they will be struggling. So I think once you get them to realize that they are no longer having the relationship building sort of conversations that we take for granted, right?
Correct.
It's those conversations where you can talk about current affairs.
Yes. Heart-to-heart talk.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Gossip.
Indeed, telling jokes.
That's right.
Talking about current affairs like the war in Ukraine, things like that. So they would then realize, gosh, it's been 10 years since I had these sort of conversations with my children. And I think that would be the point that it clicks that, hey, yes, they are communicating, but it's very limited. And then the next stage would be to help them realize the impact this has on their relationship.
Yes, that's right.
So a lot of my patients, they are fortunate enough to be living with their extended family still. But even though they're surrounded by children, grandchildren, you find that they are also isolated because of the amount and level of conversations that they have is still limited. And
because
so,
they kind of like withdraw themselves.
Yeah.
More depressed.
Correct.
More anxious.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah. You observe these personality changes.
Yes.
And a common thing they would say, at the dinner table, someone crack a joke and the rest of the table would laugh, and they'll be the one looking around and they would pretend to laugh at the end and not knowing what the joke was all about, So
that's pretty common.
Yeah.
I mean, I noticed that from like my grand uncles as well.
Yeah.
They would just try to find out what's going on, but they essentially don't know what's going on. Yeah.
So I think the key is to help the patient realize the impact the hearing loss has on their lifestyle and relationships.
That's absolutely right, Dr. Ho. Thanks for sharing. absolutely agree with you, Dr. Ho, about how detrimental the impact of untreated hearing loss can be on relationships. And even based on my personal experience as a clinical audiologist, I find that with the hearing aid wearers that I've managed, those that have better quality social interactions are those that are often, first, they start wearing their hearing aids earlier, or they optimize the usage of their hearing aids, and that eventually leads to better quality of life and better outcomes.
Yes, April, completely agree with you. And I think those success stories, right, warms the heart, right?
Yeah,
and
totally.
It tells you, well, we must be doing something right here. And those are the stories that we really want to share with the many other patients that we have. But often we encounter many barriers, right? And for the patients, denial, ignorance about their hearing loss, and then stigma and prejudice about hearing aids. And in fact, very often they would have heard about hearing aids from families and friends who have used hearing aids. And often they will come up with comments like, oh, the hearing aids are not really that helpful and they are noisy, right? This thing about hearing aids
that's a very
being
common,
noisy.
yes.
Yeah. And I suppose it's this concept, right, of letting them understand about auditory deprivation. I think we previously discussed about how patients present late, 7 to 10 years.
Yes,
right?
7 to 10 years.
Yeah.
We see that very common in our region, that they typically take about 7 to 10 years for someone who has hearing loss to take action, to seek help. Yeah. Do you see that often in your clinic?
And if you ask me, I believe that 7 to 10 years is probably an underestimation. It's probably even longer. But the why is that important, right? Because it's about the function of the brain when it comes to hearing. The brain is very intelligent, right? Since we were young, as a baby, our brain has learned to recognize what is background noise. Within the home, the sound of the fan, washing machine, traffic noises outside, and to differentiate that from the useful sounds, conversations, right? Speech sound. That's how we build human relationships.
It's like a filter.
Yes. And the brain does this automatically, right? Yeah. But the trouble is, if you have hearing loss for a long time, the first thing that you stop hearing are the background noises, right? So after a while, the brain forgets what background noises are. So imagine if you wear hearing aid for the first time, after not hearing background noises for 10 years, 15 years, it's going to be kind of noisy because your brain is going to hear all these noises again.
Suddenly you get aware of the background sounds, the surrounding sounds.
Correct. And really, we need to give our brains time to learn again what these background noises are and to learn to filter them out, right? And so you need to wear the hearing aid consistently to adapt. So I think auditory deprivation has a major impact on successful hearing aid usage.
Absolutely. No wonder, this is actually what we sing and what we say in our clinic as well. We often tell our patients, look, you don't just hear or listen with your ears, you actually hear and listen with your brains as well. And in fact, recent studies have also shown that, our brains require auditory stimulation to keep active, and that actually reduces the risk of cognitive decline, correct?
Yes, I'm glad you brought this up because over the last 10 years, there has been so many studies done around the world, including in Singapore. And they all show a consistent finding that the hearing loss is a significant risk factor for cognitive decline. And when you analyze the data from all these studies, the scientists came to the conclusion that hearing loss is the number one modifiable risk factor for dementia.
Number one modifier risk factor.
Yes.
Wow. Such a strong correlation.
Correct, yeah. And most of my patients will be completely surprised when they hear this and they'll say, wow, I didn't realize that was so important, right? And I think it's nice to be able to, for the conversation to get to this level because it's about making the patient realize that it's not just about treating hearing loss. It's about improving quality of life, improving communication, keeping the brain stimulated, and ultimately it's about reducing your chance of getting dementia.
Wow. So you help your ears and you help your brains.
Exactly.
Wow. That's absolutely good.
Yeah. And I think if we can move the conversation, right, pivot the conversation from just treating hearing loss to about treating the brain, and maintaining good mental health. I think that's how you connect to the patients, and that's how you can motivate a lot more patients to do the right thing.
Wow, Dr. Ho, I mean, I've really learned something interesting from you earlier. The part where hearing loss is the number one modifiable risk factor for cognitive decline.
Yes, and I think patients and the caregivers, when they hear this, they become more engaged.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's the whole point, right? When you treat an individual with hearing loss, it's important not to treat the individual, but to treat the entire family, because having a family member with hearing loss impacts the entire family.
Absolutely. I mean, that reminds me about my clinical experience as an audiologist in Australia. We don't call ourselves clinical audiologists. We actually call ourselves family audiologists, because, we want to emphasize the point where it's not just important for us to get a buy-in from patients and hearing aid wearers themselves, but it's actually very important for us to get the buy-in, to get the agreement and the support from their next of kin, their family members, their friends, because it takes the whole unit, the whole functional group, to get them to optimize the usage of their hearing aids. And in so doing, it helps to reduce the risk of cognitive decline.
Yeah. Well, it's reassuring that things are no different in Australia, right? And in fact, what you just mentioned reminds me of this patient that I had. It's a gentleman in his 80s, and he was sort of like almost dragged in by his son in his 50s, and the son was practically begging me. He was saying, "Hey, doc, you really need to help us, as in the family. We are looking after our dad, and he has dementia. But you know what's the worst thing? He's pretty deaf as well. And can you imagine how difficult it is to look after dad when, he can't hear you?" And I think the sad thing about this patient, right, is that when we look through his medical records, we realize that, 10, 15 years ago, he has been to see us already. And at that point, he already has quite advanced hearing loss. And the patient was still cognitively strong at that point.
Yeah.
But the patient was telling us back then that, "Doc, I want to wait till my hearing loss is bad enough before I accept hearing aids." But the sad thing is, by the time they wait till their hearing loss is bad enough, their brain may not be good enough to accept the hearing aid.
Yeah.
In fact, with this gentleman, he was not cognitively able to understand why he needs hearing aids, let alone to get used to the hearing aid.
Oh.
And I think that's very sad. It's like almost for him, it's too late to wear hearing aids.
So it's actually bad enough becomes too late.
Yes. Yeah. So this thing about what you say about the hearing loss being a very important modifiable risk factor for dementia, that is one point. But the other side of the coin would be that dementia and cognitive decline would be a major obstacle to the treatment of hearing loss. If the patient does not have mental capacity to get used to the hearing aid, it's almost like it's too late to treat the hearing loss.
So it's kind of like a symbiotic relationship, right?
Yeah.
It's or we can see it like a chicken and egg analogy.
Yes.
You can't hear well, it leads to cognitive decline. But if you have poor mental capacity, then it also affects the outcomes of your hearing.
Yes, completely. And I think it's when you can get the conversation with the family, with the patient to this level, I think this becomes a very powerful motivation for the patient and the family to accept the need for treating the hearing loss, and hopefully to treat it early before all the negative effect of hearing loss kicks in.
Absolutely right, Dr. Ho. Thanks for sharing earlier, Dr. Ho, and I think it's really enlightening and interesting to know the symbiotic relationship between hearing loss and cognitive decline. And this actually reminds me of my own personal story of my grandmother, and my granduncle. Yeah, so fortunately we could notice the symptoms of my grandmother's hearing loss quite early. So we actually got her fitted with hearing aids around the age of 65, before 70 for sure. And thankfully up till now, she was able to really use the hearing aids well and communicate very effectively with us. But conversely, I think about my granduncle. He took quite a long time to decide whether he wants to wear hearing aids. And I think at that point of time where he finally agreed to wear hearing aids, right, that was when he also had slight dementia, and I can't help but think, right, I could see that the impact and the benefits are not as great as how I could tell from my grandmother.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, April. And I think the story about your granduncle is unfortunately a story that is being repeated in so many families every day. And really what we hope to see are the happy stories about your grandmother, about getting the hearing loss treated early.
Yeah. So, Dr. Ho, how do we then decide when and what are the best options to manage hearing loss today?
Okay, I think it's a great question. Right. In my humble opinion, right, I really think that we need to go beyond just looking at the pure tone audiogram.
Okay.
Because the truth is, the pure tone audiogram just tells us that for each ear, for each frequency that we test, how loud it has to be before you could hear that tone, right? It doesn't tell us anything about how the patient functions in the real world, how much the patient is able to understand what someone else is saying.
That's true.
Yeah, when it's quiet, let alone when it's noisy, right?
That's right.
And beyond that, what is the impact of the hearing loss on that individual's quality of life?
Right.
Is there any disability? Is there any handicap?
That's right.
And the great thing about modern audiology practice is that all of these are measurable.
That's right.
Right? We can do speech tests in quiet and also speech in noise. And there are also many different sort of questionnaires that you can use to measure the hearing disability and handicap beyond just the hearing impairment.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
In fact, even during history taking, I remember, as clinical audiologists, often we ask questions to have a better understanding of how, the patient is going on. You'll find that even those with mild hearing losses, they actually find a lot of challenges. They struggle to understand conversations in meetings and in noisy environments.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's important to highlight the fact that, it's not just the PTA, the pure tone audiogram results, but it's all these things that we can gather more information so that the earlier we act, the better the outcomes will be.
Yeah, I agree, April. When you treat the patient and the family, you always win. Yeah. When you treat a piece of paper, the results on the piece of paper, sometimes you win, sometimes you don't, right? And as we know, the best treatment for hearing loss is the use of good quality hearing aids. But again, we need to have perhaps a paradigm shift and to look at the hearing aids not as the end point. You fit hearing aids, that's it, your hearing loss is treated, because patients tend to wait too long, right? And really, the hearing aid is only the beginning of the treatment journey for the hearing loss, right? And it's about the oral rehabilitation process. And together with the good quality hearing aids, what we need are good quality hearing professionals like yourself, audiologists and other professionals who can educate, counsel, guide, hold their hands sometimes, and not just then, but to involve the family, troubleshoot for them once the hearing aid is fitted, tune the hearing aid. So I think it's a process, and it's not just a one-stop hearing aid that solves all the problem. We need to move beyond that way of thinking.
Absolutely right. I think hearing aids are not just an end point to it. It's the beginning of the whole journey, which involves hearing care professionals and audiologists to, involve them and guide them through using the hearing aids and optimizing them and the whole oral rehabilitation process. Couldn't agree more that having good quality hearing aids is only the start of a journey. And I think it's important to have good hearing care professionals to guide, our patients along the way to have the better outcomes and to have the best outcomes. And I think, it brings another analogy that I have in mind. It's like we're buying a pair of new shoes, right? A pair of new running shoes. We don't just buy a pair of new running shoes and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to keep fit and I'm going to look good. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to look slim and slender. That's not the case. We actually have to put in the time, the effort, as well as the discipline. And then at the same time to feel motivated and be motivated to actually run with this pair of new running shoes in order to stay fit. Correct? Yeah.
Tell me about, exercising and not putting on weight, right? As you get older, it gets so much harder. But I love that analogy of the running shoes, right? You can have the most expensive, the most high-tech running shoes, but if you just look at it and smell it and not exercise with it, you're not going to get the fitness benefit, right? And I think same thing with the hearing aid. You can have the most top of the range, the most expensive hearing aid, but if these hearing aids are sitting in your drawer,
it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's not going to treat your hearing loss. So I think I completely agree. You need to be using the hearing aids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Dr. Ho, have you encountered any real life experiences on patients whose lives have been transformed after using hearing aids?
Wow. How much time do we have? Let me share this patient, quite recent, ladies in her 60s, really sweet lady. And she would always attend with her nephew because she's single. Mm-hmm. And quite a sad story because about a year before I saw her, she had a stroke. And even like a year later, she wasn't really functioning that well and was quite dependent on her nephew, right? To bring her everywhere. And even her activities of daily living, she wasn't managing that well. Mm-hmm. And then it was sad because the rehab team have sort of like labeled her as not rehabable, right? Because she wasn't responding to their commands.
Okay.
And the thing was, she has quite severe hearing loss as well. That wasn't recognized.
Okay.
So once we diagnosed that and got her fitted with hearing aids, very quickly, she got back onto her feet and could resume her rehab. And within a short time, was functioning pretty independently again.
And then her life is transformed.
Completely. Yeah. And also for the caregiver, the nephew.
Their lives are transformed as well.
Yes,
right?
yes. So I think it just shows how important it is to diagnose and treat the hearing loss.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, can you imagine if this patient of yours was not properly fitted with hearing aids, then she might even end up in a nursing home.
That's a great point. I think she was on the verge of being put in a nursing home when she came to see me. And now she's living at home again independently. Right. Yeah. So big cause of not treating the hearing loss. And for this lady is example of the physical side of things. But earlier we talked about the cognition, right?
Yes,
dementia. Right. And I think you can ask any caregiver, right? The only thing worse about treating a patient with, looking after a patient with dementia is looking after a patient with dementia and hearing loss, right? Yeah. So yes, I think hearing aids, good quality hearing aids do cost, but I think we do realize that you do get what you pay for. Quality products do cost. And what's important is that we need to be able to discuss the cost of not treating the hearing loss.
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true. And I think, in this fast-paced modern society, we are so used to, quick fixes, immediate solutions, right? And we need to step back and think, hey, look, it's not just about getting good quality hearing aids, but putting the time and effort, it involves getting the right support, guidance from hearing care professionals and audiologists, and then with the buy-in of your support system, that brings about the best outcome and usage of hearing aids.
Yeah, completely agree. I think it's time for a paradigm shift, right? When we talk about the treatment of hearing loss, we have to move beyond just persuading the patient to get hearing aids get the hearing aids fitted. Really what matters is the outcome, right? And the outcome that we all want to see is the successful, long-term, regular usage of hearing aid, and that will solve or prevent the disability and handicap from having untreated hearing loss.
Thanks for sharing, Dr. Ho. And I think it's important to once again remember that hearing loss is the number one modifiable risk factor for dementia. And, consequently, it's also a symbiotic relationship because dementia is a major hindrance to successful management of hearing loss.
Spot on. So I think the important message that we need to get through is don't wait till your hearing loss is bad enough. Because unfortunately, by the time your hearing loss is bad enough, your brain may not be good enough for you to, have the oral rehabilitation with the hearing aid. So I think it's important to diagnose hearing loss early and also to treat the hearing loss early and seeking help from the right hearing care professionals and getting good quality hearing aids. I think the important thing when we treat is not just treating the patient but treating the whole family, because ultimately the family members, they are going to be the caregivers, right? And they'll be the ones to pay the price for family members with untreated hearing loss.
That's absolutely right. Thank you so much for your sharing and insights, Dr. Ho. And I'm personally very encouraged by your passion and your dedication. And, it's great to have a true great advocate like yourself that talks about using a holistic, optimum approach for managing hearing loss. And I have certainly learned a lot from today's session, and I'm sure the information that we can get out from today's interview will greatly benefit our patients and viewers. So thank you once again, Dr. Ho, for joining us here today.
Thank you very much, April, and to your team as well. Thank you.
Wow, that was such an informative session. I've learned so much. The importance of early intervention, the link between hearing loss and cognitive decline, and why is it so important to have hearing aids as an early point of intervention. And last but not least, let's not forget the importance of having oral rehabilitation for patients. Now, with that in mind, let us go to our next speaker, Isabel Loh, an audiologist who is driven and passionate to help those with hearing loss. She is a certified experienced audiologist, graduated with a Masters of Clinical Audiology from the National University of Singapore. We join her as she simplifies on how we can use this as hearing care professionals to apply in our very own clinical sessions.
Wasn't that such an insightful session by Dr. Ho and April? Now let me recap some of the points that we have learned in the session that we may adopt for use in our counseling sessions with end users. I am going to break down these points into two parts. The first part will be talking about points we can counsel end users who have yet to be prescribed with hearing aids. The second part, I'm going to talk about points we can counsel end users who have already been fitted with hearing aids. For end users who have yet to be prescribed with hearing aids, most of the time, they are still in the process of acknowledging their hearing loss. So for these people, we need to emphasize the impact that untreated hearing loss has on their daily lives. We can counsel them with points such as these. Firstly, that untreated hearing loss affects their relationships with their loved ones. Secondly, that this decreased quality of conversations they have will affect their social and emotional well-being. And thirdly, that untreated hearing loss can actually increase their risk of dementia and cognitive decline. When we share about the impact of untreated hearing loss with these people, we hope that can encourage them to be fitted with hearing aids. We can also increase the general awareness of the impact of untreated hearing loss by sharing this knowledge video by Dr. Ho and April in your clinic or on your clinic's internet and social media platforms. For end users who have already been fitted with hearing aids, we need to emphasize the importance of hearing rehabilitation journey. We may counsel them on points such as these. Firstly, that hearing aid is only the first step in the beginning of their treatment journey for hearing loss. Secondly, that it is very important that they find a good hearing care professional who can adjust their hearing aids and counsel them along this journey. And thirdly, that hearing rehabilitation is actually a complex journey as it involves brain adaptation to their hearing aids. And they need to be patient with themselves as they use hearing aids along this journey. We have some consultation tools that I would like to share with you that you can use for counseling your end users along their journey of hearing aids. So today I would like to introduce two of them to you. Firstly, we have the listening exercises tool. And secondly, we have the adapted version of the self-assessment of communication questionnaire. I will go through these two tools one by one on how you can use them in your counseling sessions, because these tools will help to increase your professionalism as a credible hearing care consultant. The listening exercises have a wide range of listening situations. They are categorized from easy to more challenging situations. In this exercise, the goal is to educate the end user that there are categories of listening situations, and he needs to progressively train himself to get used to the sound of the hearing aids in different situations. It is recommended to start from the easy listening situations, such as focusing on a single conversation partner in a quiet place, or listening to various environmental sounds, such as in a public place, on a busy street, or in nature. When the user is used to the sound of the hearing aids in easy listening situations, they can progress to practice listening in more difficult situations. This is a practical way of helping your end user in his journey on hearing rehabilitation. Not only does it educate him that he needs time to get used to the hearing aid, but it also manages his expectations that he has to progressively move from easy to challenging situations with a hearing aid. The adapted self-assessment of communication questionnaire is meant for your end users to fill out before their first and second review with you after the hearing aid fitting. The questionnaire is meant to track their progress with the hearing aid and serve as a starting point for you to find out which situations they will need tuning of the hearing aid, or if they need counseling about their expectations with the hearing aids. As you can see in this questionnaire, the questions include many listening situations such as different conversation situations in different environments. This will cover a wide range of situations to help you with tuning or counseling. You may request these tools from your trainers or sales representatives. You may customize this tool to have your own clinic branding. We hope that you'll make use of these tools as they will enhance your professionalism as a credible hearing care consultant.
Wow, that was absolutely incredible, don't you think? If you like what we have shared with you today, please don't forget to share this video with your friend or your family member who you think can benefit from this video. It will greatly help us and you as well to provide our mission, which is to give everybody a wonderful sound for all. Thank you very much for listening.